The last part we're going to talk about is some of the asynchronous and parallel and dynamic capabilities of the .NET framework. Parallel computing refers to how we can use the multiple cores, multiple processors that are built into modern hardware. It's interesting to go out and see if you can even buy a single core machine anymore. So it's important that the framework makes it easier for us to go out and parallelize the code to work against them. This includes the parallel task library, which allows us to go out and declare things as running in parallel, in which case then it'll go out and start the task and allow other things to run. A set of the public types and APIs introduced in the .NET Framework 4 for threading and threading task namespace accomplish this. P-link refers to marking a query within link as being parallel. And it is literally as simple as going through and marking a return set from a query as parallel. And the runtime then knows that it can use the parallel task library to run that alongside of other things. So it implements the full set of the link query features, and it is for the iParallel enumerable interface. The other type of coding is asynchronous, where we've got operations happening and we need to wait until they've finished and then continue processing. Instead of using delegates and callbacks, which can be some fairly complex and hairy code to understand, the async model uses something called a modifier, the async modifier, to mark a method as using the asynchronous logic, and the compiler then will convert that code into the same thing that was generated by the delegates and the callbacks. And next, you put in a wait keyword to allow us to wait for that processing to finish, and then we can go ahead and continue on until the processing is finished. For example, in the Windows 8 example where we've got message dialogues, we use the await keyword to show the dialogue, and then the processing will halt there until the user finishes the async action and the control returns back to the program. Async methods are going to be marked with the async modifier. They're going to return either a void or a task of T. The task of T is part of the threading library. The await keyword will yield control until the operation completes, and then our processing resumes after the operation completes, and then it'll execute the synchronization in the context of the caller. So let's take a look at how we use the asynchronous processing. I'm going to go into my solution. I'm going to add a new project. I'm just going to add a Windows 8 project just to kind of do something a little bit different. So here I've got an empty Windows 8 app. We'll call this my Win 8 demo and say OK. And in here we've got, let's go ahead and close that. In my main page, I'm going to have a button that we'll click on, so it'll load up the designer. And then when that button gets clicked, we're going to go out and show a message box or something along those lines. So here's our design surface. If I make it a little bit smaller and scroll it up, you can see there's this. I can go into my toolbox, and I can grab a button. I can drag the button onto the screen. I can make it larger if I want to, and I can say, here's my content. Click me. And we'll make the font size on this a little bit bigger. And then when you click it, we'll have an event handler that we'll double click here. And it has the button click event. And what I want to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to say, maybe I got a string, my message is equal to hello world. And then from this, I want to go out and I want to create a dialog box to go out and show this. So I'm going to create a message dialog, which is a namespace that is in the Windows UI pop-up. So I'm going to go ahead and add that, called DLG is equal to a new message dialog. And then I'm going to put in here the actual message text, my message. Now what I want to do is I want to show this dialog. So normally you would go ahead and say dlg.showAsynchronous, and then path in what is going to happen. And if I do that, you'll notice that we get this green underline on that. And what that is it's telling me that this is an asynchronous operation. And to make this into something that could be awaited, that maybe we don't want to just spin along and keep going after this pops up, we actually want to wait for it. And so the help text is saying make it awaitable. If If I do the control period, it'll actually give us the option of doing that. But here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say var rc is equal to await dlg.showAsync. And in order for that to happen, I actually have to mark this method as being an asynchronous method. So by marking the method as async and then using the await keyword, now I'm going to let this run, and when it's done, it's going to return back some value. And I can say var results is equal to rc.toString. And if I put a break in here and I say go ahead and run this, what I'll find is that this is going to go out. It'll create the project for us. Let's go out and set this as my startup project. And then go ahead and run it. Comes up, we click the Click Me button. It goes out, says Hello World. I close it, and now notice that we're not out of the button click yet, and that's because the execution halted while we were at the await command, and then it came down to the next one where I'm able to then interject other logic. So the await keyword makes it very easy to implement the asynchronous pattern without having to write a whole section of code around the callbacks and the delegates and all of that logic. So asynchronous processing is very simple to go ahead and use in the .NET framework. This was introduced in the 4.5 framework and within Windows 8 timeframe. So in Visual Studio 2012 and beyond, we can now start using this async pattern for handling our asynchronous methods.